Hiya, and welcome back. If it's your first time here, this is where I talk about stuff like maritime history or stuff of interest, Irish history sometimes, things that are of interest to me, and I want to share them with people of like mind. And if you have a mind like mine, God love you. But today, submarine movies. Okay, submarine movies. There's a lot of tropes and cliches that you get in submarine movies. They're almost expected. There's always a scene where everybody watches the depth gauge inch around as the submarine goes below its recommended depth. You might have an old sweat say to a young guy, "We could be crushed like a tin can or crushed like an egg," and everybody watches as the needle creeps around. Another great tense scene they usually have is when they rig for silent running. Everybody has to be quiet, and then some guy will stifle a sneeze or hit a cup with his elbow. Another great one is the scenes where you'll have depth charges going off, and suddenly some flange joint will fail, and there'll be water spraying everywhere, and people jump up and start turning off valves, and nobody asks what the impact is of what they've just turned off, how it affects the ship, because turning off all these valves never seems to affect anything. But another great stable plot device in these movies, in an awful lot of them, is tension between the captain and the first officer, or the exec, the XO in the American ships. I was thinking of doing a kind of a score sheet for each of these movies with those cliches, but I didn't bother. Now, movies that I'm going to mention that are not actually in the top 10, but you might want to know about. The most recent film, Hunter Killer, Gerard Butler, looks fantastic, insults your intelligence on so many levels. It's such a disappointment. Could have been on that list, could have been a great film. Looks great, as I say. American submarine, rogue Russian general, which is another cliche, I suppose, and they go into Russian waters. There's a SEAL team dropped in, and they're all working together. Gerard Butler is the guy who rose to the ranks to become captain of this American submarine. However, it just insults your intelligence on so many occasions. There's a really tense scene where they're head to head with a Russian destroyer. Everybody is fingers on the trigger. It's all really tense. They're in Russian waters. There's a major diplomatic incident happening. They look to the captain. What's he going to do? He says, battle stations. As if there weren't already battle stations. They have a SEAL team that's dropped into Russia and that hikes uphill to get to a seaport. And when they leave the seaport, they go downhill away from it. Where's that big spillway going? Makes no sense. So many things that happen in this film are just ludicrous. If you're 16, you'd love this movie. What a waste. Looks good though. The Wolf's Call is a French movie, and it's interesting to see a movie from outside the Anglo-American sphere. It's a modern French submarine. Actually, it's set in the near future, very near future. Tension between the West and Russia. It focuses on a guy who is the ears of the submarine. He's the expert who can tell whether he's listening to a 3-bladed or a 4-bladed propeller, that kind of guy. It's all about him and his role, and it gets really tense towards the end. Hunt for Red October style, different submarines. It's all very tense, but it has to get over a ludicrous opening scene where they have the French submarine is on the surface waiting for Special Forces Frogman team to return and swim into the torpedo tubes. So they can't dive, but there's a helicopter coming to attack them, and the helicopter needs to be dealt with. So the submarine captain gets an RPG-7 type shoulder-launched missile, goes up to the top of the conning tower. I know they don't call them conning towers in modern submarines. Up to the top of the sail or the fin.
it! Shoot! Shoot!
It's like a scene. It's silly. It's so silly. It's like a scene from a Roger Moore James Bond movie. Really detracts from the rest of the movie, I think. But anyway, it's not a bad movie in many ways.
Captain, there's no question the Titan is hostile and our maneuvers are hostile. We must engage.
And that's called The Wolf's Call, French film. Grey Lady Down didn't make the list, but you might want to know about it. Made in the 60s, was it 60s or 70s? 70s, I'd say. Technicolor, big production. It seems must have been made around the time they were making all these disaster movies like Earthquake and Towering Inferno, because it's basically something like Towering Inferno underwater, submarine disaster, and they have to keep moving from compartment to compartment, and it's just a big budget movie.
Secure that door! There are men back there! Secure it!
See it once, you wouldn't really want to bother seeing it again. And really, my criteria for choosing movies or books or anything for my lists is do you want to go back to it again and again? That's what's telling. And in this case, I wouldn't bother see it once, but you should know about it. Now, one thing I forgot to mention was a recent film with Matthias Schoenaerts, Léa Seydoux and Colin Firth. It's called Kursk Last Mission, and it is the true story of the Kursk and how it was lost, what happened to those on board as they tried to survive as the rescue mission mounted, without much cooperation, international cooperation, because the Russians would not allow in the initial days any help, and the families were quite upset, and it centres on one particular officer and his wife. And it's a very good film, and this really did come close to getting on the list. I had it on the list for a while before I took it off, but I'd recommend you see it. Kursk, The Last Mission. Now, onto my top 10 list. Number 10, you might be surprised by. Number 10 is an unusual movie, but it has Raquel Welch in a wetsuit. I'm joking, it does, but that's not why you should see it. The Fantastic Voyage. It's a science fiction film set in, it's in Cold War, 1960s. There's a diplomat who's been injured and his brain can only be repaired from the inside. So they shrink a submarine and inject it into his bloodstream. This was the era when they were making imaginative movies like Planet of the Apes, and on TV we had Time Tunnel and Land of the Giants, and you know, it was people were being imaginative. Science fiction was going mainstream. They made this movie. Stephen Boyd plays the captain. Stephen Boyd, the Irish actor, who you remember as the bad guy in the chariot race in Ben-Hur. What happens to the submarine is basically the sort of things that happen in all submarines and submarine movies, the cliches that I was talking about. I was really impressed by it as a kid. I was really impressed by it when I looked at it recently. It's dated a bit, of course, but some of these movies are even more dated than I'm going to talk about. But I liked it, and it was imaginative, and it has Raquel Welch in a wetsuit. Okay, this was, in fairness to Raquel Welch now, this was a breakthrough movie. This was before she became a big sex symbol. If they'd made this movie 3 or 4 years later, she probably would have had a tighter wetsuit with the zip down a bit more. But in this, she's just a good-looking scientist. So that's it anyway. Fantastic Voyage. Number 10. Number 9 is called Above Us the Waves. John Mills. Now, John Mills seems to be in half the submarine movies ever made. He's in another movie later on, and he's also in a movie called Morning Departure, which is about loosely based on HMS Thetis that sank. This movie, Above Us the Waves, based on true events, very much based on true events, quite close to, although they don't use the same names as the real individuals, but it's based on Royal Navy efforts to get the Tirpitz, which was in a fjord in Norway, and it was basically hiding out there, threatening to come out all the time and attack Allied shipping. It did have an effect just by being there. Convoy PQ-17 was dispersed because they thought the Tirpitz was out, and because it was dispersed, it was basically decimated. So the Allies wanted to get the Tirpitz. First way they tried to do this was with ride-on human torpedoes called chariots. That was basically copied by what the Italians had done to the British in the Med. The Italians were the first ones to do this. So British tried to do this across the North Sea to the Tirpitz, and after that then they did the X-craft, mini submarines, and John Mills, Donald Sinden, John Gregson. The movie was filmed in 1955 around Guernsey by a guy called Ralph Thomas, who did movies like Doctor in the Sea, Doctor at Sea, Doctor in the House, comedies. Not a whole lot else that stands out, but it's a good, solid, workmanlike film covering those chariots and the X-craft.
It's no good, Skipper. She won't answer.
What's our depth?
40 feet. She's on her side.
All right, then. We'll go on in as we are. Half a head group down.
Half a head group down.
There was a later film covering the X-craft. James Caan was in it, called Submarine X1. That was colour in the 1960s. It was X1. Submarine X1 was one of those movies. It had to have an American actor. Yeah, it was the done thing. But James Caan was pretty good in it. It was just a kind of a boring film. It took more liberties with the truth. They had a German paratroop raid on their training base in Scotland, that kind of thing. Other than that, it kept fairly close to the true story of the X-craft. And it's worth seeing. But the better film about the X-craft is no doubt the John Mills movie, Above Us the Waves. That was number 9. Now, number 8 is going to be controversial. I know people hate this movie, and I'm going to stick up for it. There were questions asked in the House of Parliament of Britain about it. Prime Minister made a statement about it. It annoyed a lot of people. It's called U571. Number 8, U571, American movie about an American mission, fictional American mission, to try and get the German Enigma coding machines from a U-boat. In the war, there had been an Enigma machine recovered from a U-boat. Was it from sailors from HMS Bulldog that did it? And they're mentioned at the end of this movie in a title card that comes up and talks about what really happened. But people got quite upset about it. I want to present an alternative view. Look at all the World War II movies that were just good yarns, you know, and that's what this was. This was a caper movie. You had stuff like, you know, Hannibal Brooks, Oliver Reed taking an elephant over the Alps. You know, that was made up. We had the kind of person who gave out about this movie is probably the kind of person who loves The Great Escape. The Great Escape has loads of Americans. There was no Americans in that prison camp. Look at, if you like this movie, I think, how can I put it? If you're going to get upset about this movie, you might as well get upset about Kelly's Heroes. You might as well get upset about The Guns of Navarone. You know, there's a lot of things. I think the outrage about this movie was a symptom of the modern outrage. That's almost recreational outrage. People just get upset too easy these days. This film is not a bad movie. It's a good yarn. It's well made.
Schnell Stromrauschen 180. Heilung steht für schnell unter. Ein Zerstörer ist an euch. Verdammt! Auf 40 Meter geht schnell. Beide Maschinen kurz voraus.
It's got Matthew McConaughey and Harvey Keitel. John Bon Jovi pops up there too. It's very enjoyable.
All ahead full, sir! Batteries are flat! Training fast!
Mr. Tyler, I hear the S-33 breaking up. Wait,
I hold a submerged U-boat. 010. Real close. Less than 1,000 yards.
Goddamn resupply, sir. Trigger, what's heading?
280, sir.
Alright, right full rudder, steady on 010.
Alright, sir. Right full rudder, steady on course 010, sir.
Tank starboard back full, rapid, get back to me.
Starboard back full, aye, sir.
The screenwriter David Ayer was the guy who wrote or possibly directed Fury, the over-the-top tank movie, and the director Jonathan Mostow directed Terminator 3. Not a whole lot else that stands out, but it's a good yarn. It's like Memphis Belle on a submarine. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong, and it's enjoyable, you know. It doesn't insult you quite as much as Hunter Killer. Just turn your brain off and watch it, and you'll enjoy it. Honest, give it a chance. U571, number 8. Number 7 is Run Silent, Run Deep. Clark Gable, Burt Lancaster, directed by Robert Wise, who did films like West Side Story, The Sound of Music. He also did Star Trek: The Motion Picture, black and white film, 1958. It's about, there's a touch of the Captain Ahab about it, because Clark Gable is the captain of this submarine. The previous captain had been injured. Burt Lancaster, as the executive officer, was about to take over command of the ship, but he had Clark Gable inflicted on him as a man who had been working behind a desk, having lost his sub. Does a really good job of presenting the community on board. You know, the crew of a vessel is like a big village, and I like a movie that presents that and captures that. And this is one of those movies. It does it very well.
Break it up.
For the next captain of the NERCA, sir. What we mean to say, Mr. Bledsoe, congratulations. Good luck. Good luck.
Good luck, sir. So this is the way we start, huh? Bribery.
Don't know what you mean, sir.
Next thing you know, it'll be special privileges. Sunbathing on the deck, 2-hour watches.
Sunburned crew's a happy crew, sir. It's an old Navy axiom.
That you just made up.
Very good film. I really enjoyed it, and I recommend it to you if you're into submarines. You'll see how American submarines work compared to some British submarines in the other movies that I'm going to mention, wartime films that are about to come up.
40 feet.
Steady on course, Captain.
Mark, 50 leveled off.
Bar one. Time? 42 seconds. That's not fast enough. You have to get those vents open sooner.
Aye, sir.
Stand by the surface. We'll try it again.
Stand by the surface.
Stand.
Check it out. Good movie. Run Silent, Run Deep. I should mention some other American movies. 1951, we had John Wayne in Operation Pacific, dealing with dodgy torpedoes and a dodgy marriage. In 1957, those Hellcats of the Navy, with Ronald Reagan, future President Ronald Reagan, and his wife Nancy. 1958 saw Glenn Ford in Torpedo Run, where he was hunting aircraft carrier, Japanese aircraft carrier responsible for Pearl Harbor. There's a good few flashbacks in this movie to pre-war stuff, and the only thing of interest really in it is the escape from a sunken submarine by the crew using the Momsen Lung escape device. And of course there's a great movie, Enemy Below, with Robert Mitchum and Kurt Jurgens, which I featured in my top 10 nautical movies film, which is why it's not mentioned here. Number 6 is a Cold War movie, K-19 Widowmaker, directed by Catherine Bigelow, who's quite well known now for having directed The Hurt Locker. But she's always been around making good movies. The original Point Break was one of hers. The better one, not the remake. And this movie stars Liam Neeson and Harrison Ford.
Simulate flooding in the F torpedo room and emergency surface.
A rapid ascent beneath the ice cap is not advisable, Captain.
I did not ask for your advice.
Flooding in compartment 10. Emergency service.
Soviet true story Well, based on a true story of K-19, this ship. The original ship was not called the Widowmaker. The original ship's nickname was Hiroshima because it involves a Russian ship sent on a mission to fire a missile, test fire a missile from up in the Arctic, then patrol the Atlantic, the eastern seaboard of the US, where they have trouble with their reactor. The movie was made in 2002 in and around Nova Scotia in Canada, and they used a real Russian submarine. There's a story behind the submarine that they used. It had been bought when decommissioned by the Russians by one of the wealthiest men in Finland, and he had used it as a cafe, restaurant bar. Ended up on eBay. Opening bid was supposed to be $1 million. That was they got no bids, but the people producing this movie had noticed it, and so they leased it for a while, and they in Halifax they used it. That's what's great about it. It looks really real. It's a real Russian submarine. It's quite convincing. Liam Neeson plays it very well. Harrison Ford does a good job too. I would have been interested maybe in some other different actor rather than Harrison Ford. There was another movie, Russian Cold War movie called Phantom. Something that isn't worth watching twice. Unfortunately, Ed Harris is in it, and I really like him. And I wonder how he would have done in the Harrison Ford role here. But it might have been a great. It is a good film. I like it. What horrible things go wrong? It's in the reactor. Their coolant fails. They're trying to jury rig some kind of way of keeping the coolant going. They have to work in radiation. Meanwhile, there's a growing international incident. It's a good film. Can't say much more about it. Check it out. K-19, Widowmaker. Number five is a 2014 film by a guy called Kevin MacDonald. He's a documentary filmmaker. He won an Oscar for his documentary about the Munich Olympics terrorist incident where an Israeli sportsmen were killed by terrorists in Munich, and he's made other documentaries that were very well regarded. He made the feature film, The Last King of Scotland. This film, number 5, is Black Sea with Jude Law. Kind of passed people by a bit, I think, this movie. I think it's brilliant. Jude Law plays this grizzled, out of work, salvage submarine captain, salvage expert, undersea work, oil rig stuff. He's done all that. He's out of a job.
I've been working on submarines for nearly 30. I lost my family to this job.
They'd like you to clear your desk.
There's some shady businessmen put together this project to get a decommissioned Russian submarine, take it to sea, and they have uncovered the whereabouts of a German U-boat that was carrying gold. So again, it's a caper movie. He has to put together a crew. The crew, Ben Mendelsohn's in it. The crew are people he knows and can trust, and people who can operate a Russian submarine.
Proper fucking gold, boss.
Wait, Robinson, you can't be serious. Look, this wreck's gonna sink.
Fucking useless, some of it don't.
So it's half these Northern England guys, half Russians, or Scottish, maybe, not Northern England, and half Russians. And Jude Law is trying to keep it together, and what can go wrong does go wrong. It's a great film, great yarn, tense, claustrophobic, all the rest. Some interesting characters, interesting dialogue, and an interesting plot. If you haven't seen it, you really should. Talking about it makes me want to watch it again. Jude Law, Black Sea, number 5. Number 4 is We Dive at Dawn, 1943 film by a guy called Anthony Asquith and directed by Anthony Asquith. We Dive at Dawn was filmed during the war in 1942, right? It was a wartime movie, and it was about a mission of a British submarine. John Mills again. John Mills is the captain of this submarine called the Sea Tiger. They used 2 submarines for the filming of this that had been made for built for the Turks, but Britain hung on to them at the start of the war. They had numbers something like 613 and 614, so they basically painted out the last digit, and the sub just appears as 61 in the film, but it could have been either sub they used, and one of those submarines was actually lost later in the war, sunk by a German U-boat somewhere off Africa. It's about a mission that this sub has to go on to take on a German battleship called the Brandenburg, fictional battleship. Although it's a wartime movie, it doesn't come across like a propaganda movie or anything. It presents it seems like a very realistic portrayal of life on a submarine on this one mission. It's tense. There's a small amount of what the crew are experiencing at home, their home life in the start of the movie, and so you get to care about the characters, and it's good.
Stop, bird. Pull us down together.
Stop, bird. Pull us down together, sir.
Pull us down together.
How's it now?
Still foul, sir.
Grip down, slow ahead.
Rope down, slow ahead.
You like it? I like it. A second viewing makes it even better, actually, and that's why it's so far up this list. There's an American film called Destination Tokyo. It's another wartime movie that would be kind of an equivalent, if you want to look for an equivalent movie made during the war about a particular mission. Destination Tokyo. Check it out. This one has John Mills, Eric Portman, and a load of actors that you won't really know, but they're all pretty good. And like I say, it's gritty and believable, even though it is a wartime movie. We Dive at Dawn, number 4. Number 3 is The Hunt for Red October, 1990 film directed by John McTiernan, who was as well known for thrillers like Die Hard. It's based on a Tom Clancy novel. The plot revolves around a Russian submarine that appears to be gone rogue or possibly defecting, and Sean Connery plays the captain of the Russian submarine. So you end up with a lot of tense situations with nobody trusting anybody. The Russians aren't too happy with what's going on. The Americans aren't too happy with what's going on. Nobody's sure who to believe. Nobody's sure which of their experts to believe. Marius, the captain? Sean Connery character is very interesting, and Scott Glenn plays an American sub-captain who he's kind of dueling with, and you have then this agent who's dropped into the mix, who's an expert on he's a researcher who's basically thrust into all this, and he's played by Alec Baldwin. Big high-profile movie. I believe it's better than the book. That the book was kind of turgid. The movie's one of those movies apparently where it's much better than the book. Although I believe in the book the British Navy, the Royal Navy, is more involved in it. Left out of it completely in the film. The film is kind of based on a 1975 incident where there was a Russian, it was a surface vessel, and there was a captain who went a bit rogue, but it wasn't that he was trying to defect to the west or anything. In this case, the real captain in 75 was trying to reboot the Russian Revolution and do it properly, and be more equitable and more intent, keep it, restart the revolution and keep it close to what it was supposed to be for the people rather than for the party powerful. Didn't get anywhere. He ended up getting executed, I think. But that's supposed to be the inspiration for the story. One thing of note is there's a quote from Christopher Columbus at the end of the movie that I've seen pop up on the internet, as if it is a quote from Christopher Columbus, but it was only made up by the screenwriter. Great film. People would regard it as the benchmark submarine movie, Cold War submarine movie, The Hunt for Red October, number 3. Number 2 is my favourite Cold War submarine movie, and that's Crimson Tide. The blurb on the poster said, "Tension you can chew," and it certainly is like that. In fact, the last 60 minutes of this film is practically real time, you know. It's very tense. The reason I chose it over The Hunt for Red October is basically the cast. I much prefer looking at Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman. I find them more interesting.
As you no doubt heard, my XO has appendicitis. He's the best I ever had. I need a good man to fill his spot. Your name was at the top of the list.
Well, that's good to know, sir.
It was a short list.
Tony Scott directed this now. He's Ridley Scott's brother, who recently committed suicide. But he'd known from movies like True Romance, and he went on to make a lot of great movies, Man on Fire and Deja Vu and stuff with Denzel Washington. And he had True Romance was written by Tarantino, and Tony Scott did bring in Tarantino to tighten up the script in this. There's a scene early on when they're going to the submarine on a bus. They're talking about submarine movies, and that bit was put in by Tarantino apparently. In the film, there's basically a rogue Russian general got on a base, allegedly fueling weapons to have a first strike against the US. The submarine gets this garbled message. They don't know, are they supposed to launch at Russia or not? Because that's what they were put on standby to do. Was it a launch command or not? And that's a lot of the tension then.
I'd agree that that's what Clausewitz was trying to say.
But you wouldn't agree with it?
No, sir, I do not. No, I just think that in the nuclear world, the true enemy can't be destroyed.
Attention on deck. Von Clausewitz will now tell us exactly who the real enemy is. Von?
In my humble opinion, in the nuclear world, the true enemy is war itself.
Submerge the ship.
Diving officer, submerge the ship. Make your depth 150 feet.
Make my depth 150 feet. Aye, sir. Chief of the watch. On the 1MC. Dive, dive.
The tension between them is great. The two of them playing on the loyalties of the other crew. Viggo Mortensen plays the weapons officer who's torn. There's other people torn. There's a scene where there's a poor unfortunate radio man trying to fix the radio with a soldering iron, and all the pressure of a Third World War is on him trying to fix this radio. Anybody who's ever done a technical role will kind of identify with him trying to fix something under pressure. I really enjoy this film. It's my number 2. Crimson Tide. Tension you can chew. Now, there was a time, Jesus, going back about, must be 10 years now, myself and a mate, Steve, if you're out there, Steve, if you ever see this, we visited the Submarine Movie in Gosport, which is very near Portsmouth. They have one of the X-craft there, they have some early submarines, and they have a full-size World War II era submarine. Didn't quite get finished, I think it was being built or it was laid down in World War II and was finished afterwards, and saw service through the 50s in the Cold War. But you go in, they cut a hole near the forward torpedo room and you can walk through and exit at the rear, at the aft, at the back, the stern. And it's pretty much as you'd expect. It's great. And they have some old Submariners there. And me and my mate Steve had been debating which was the better movie, Hunt for Red October or Crimson Tide. We were just joking about which was better. So when we met, there was about 3 ex-submariners posted along this submarine to tell you about it. It was great, well worth doing now. And I would chat to them and then say, by the way, what's your favourite submarine movie? Expecting it might be Crimson Tide or Hunt for Red October, but all 3 of them said Das Boot. This movie is a 1981 movie directed by Wolfgang Petersen. The film is based on a book by Lothar Gunther Buchheim, who was embedded with U-91 in the war as a correspondent. After the war, he wrote a novel based on his experiences, and it became a bestseller in Germany. The Americans had looked at making this. Don Siegel had been developing a script. There was talk of Robert Redford maybe playing the captain, maybe even Paul Newman. Never happened. Eventually the West Germans made it, the most expensive movie they made at the time, and it was a big hit. Interestingly, it was a big hit in America. It was in 2 versions, and it was the German language version rather than the dubbed that made more money. And people do say you should watch it in the German version. Although the dubbed version was dubbed by the original actors. They were all bilingual, so it was their own voices that they were dubbed with for the dubbing. It's a very claustrophobic, tense movie. Tried to get as real as possible. The author, by the way, wasn't 100% happy with it. He said it was a bit like a cross between an American action movie and a German World War II era documentary. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, although he did think it was a bit overacted, and people were a bit more professional in reality than some of the way it was acted, which is fair enough. But it is definitely a great film. And of course, there's that essential sense of community.
Hey, jetzt sind wir die Tommies.
It's a long way to Tipperary. It's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary.
Die Platte wird doch ihrem weltanschaulichen Unterbau nicht schaden, 1WO.
Das Boot, #1. So there you are now. My favourite submarine movies. Hope you enjoyed it. Mind yourselves.